So when you think about the afflictions and how they torment your own mind and create disturbances in the lives of other people, that's fairly, by now we are beginning to see that. We can't necessarily see all the ramifications because we're still grasping on to certain aspects of our attachment and certain aspects of our anger as these things being justified and wonderful on the path to happiness. But we are beginning to recognize that so much of our experience comes from our own mind, how we look at things, and then the emotions that arise in response to those. So it's good not just to dwell in the afflictive side, but to also think how wonderful it would be to, let's say, be free of attachment, to be free of resentment, to be free of laziness or whatever else is an obstacle for you. So take a couple of minutes and imagine what it would be like. Go through some of the afflictions that are especially difficult for you and just imagine what it would be like to not have these coloring your experience. And think of how nice it would be if you didn't have those qualities, how your relationships with other people would change. And in that way, develop the aspiration for Buddhahood, to be free of these afflictions, to develop all the excellent qualities of a fully enlightened being, and how your whole mind would change in terms of how you feel about yourself, and so would your interactions with others. So, we were talking about the training nuns, the shikshamana. Okay, so the vow or the vow here, talking about like the set of precepts. The vow of a probational nun, the vow of a training nun, is after taking the novice or shramaneri vow to abandon the 6 root things and 6 secondary things. So this is an entirely different presentation than the ones that you have taken with the Dharmaguptaka. There's 6, you still have the 6 roots, and then the different ways that if you don't keep them properly, you have to retake them. Okay, But here they're proposing 12 Shikshamana precepts. Okay, and there's another Vinaya that has 18 Shikshamana precepts. So it's entirely different than the 6 in the Dharmakiptaka. So here are the 6 root things for the training nun. Okay, and the 6, okay, so the 6 root, abandon the 6 root and the 6 secondary. Oh, okay, so the 6 root, not to go on the road alone. Okay, this is for reasons of safety. Not to swim across a river, also for safety. Not to touch a male person. Not to stay with a male person alone. And not to act as a go-between, arranging a couple's getting together. And not to conceal what is censorable. So if you know somebody else committed a root transgression, hiding it. Okay, so those are the 6 root things to abandon. And then, this is a little bit strange. Those were the 6 secondary things, that I just read. And then the 6, but it says there are the 6 root things to abandon. Anyway, here's the list of the second one. It seems like those were the 6 root, and now I'm going to do the 6 secondary ones. Okay, not to hold, it says gold, but what it means is money, valuable things, gold, silver. Not to shave the hair on the private parts. Not to eat food that is not received. In other words, all your food should be offered to you. Not to eat what is hoarded. In other words, not to eat what is stored over, not to keep food yourself and hoard it overnight to eat the next day. One reason we have the pure places marked off is so that there are, like the snack counter is where things can be kept and they do not belong to us personally, but they can be taken, they can be accessed at any time. Okay, so that way you're not hoarding it. But if you have some food, okay, you can't keep it overnight yourself. You can put it in a pure place on the snack counter, but other people can also take it too. Okay. Not to excrete on green herbage, not to dig in the soil. So those are the secondary things to abandon. Okay, yeah, so it's quite different than the Dharmakiptaka, but it does give you some idea of the kinds of things, because all of these are going to relate to Bikshuni precepts that you take later on. Okay, now we're getting into the full Bikshuni vow, okay? So there's a different number in the Mula Sravastivada and in the Dharmakiptaka. As His Holiness says, consider that these lineages were passed down orally and not written down. They're remarkably similar. Sometimes something that is one precept in one tradition is 2 precepts in another, and vice versa. Okay, so in the Mula Sravastivada, the nuns have 364 precepts, and in the Dharmakiptaka, 348. Okay, both traditions have 8 parajika, or 8 defeats, and if you break those, your ordination's finished. Then the Mula Sravastivada has 20 remainders, and the Dharmakiptaka has 17. Remainders are a class of precepts that are quite serious, but if you transgress them, you still have the remainder of your ordination, and they can be purified. But it's a very complicated process to purify them. So it's better not to do them. Okay, then the Mula Sravastivada has 33 forfeiture lapses. Forfeiture lapses are if you obtain something in a way that is not in accord with how the Buddha set it out. Okay, so somebody offers you something and you go to them and you say, oh, I would like this one. It's really nice. It's expensive, so please get that one. Okay, whereas the people didn't have any wish, they just offered you something simple, but you asked for the most expensive thing. Yeah, and that's not good for the donor, and it creates a lot of confused and bad feelings. Forfeiture lapses also are things like somebody gives you an offering for a specific purpose, and instead of using it for that purpose, you use it for something else. Yeah, somebody gives you some money and says, oh, this is for your retreat, but instead you go on vacation and lie on the beach or something like that. Okay. Or people give something to the monastery and say it's for this purpose, but you use it for something else, or you give it to somebody else. Okay, so we have to be quite careful with donations. Yeah, and then the Mula Sravastivada. The Dharmaguptaka has 30 of those. Then the Mula Sravastivada has 180 simple lapses, and the Dharmaguptaka has 178. So those are all sorts of different precepts, arranging. That's where not taking the life of an animal is not eating in the afternoon, not taking intoxicants. Some things that seem very serious are in the lapses, and then there's other things that don't seem quite so serious. So it's just a lot of different things. That's where the one about music and dancing and entertainment fall. Yeah, okay. Then there's in Mula Sravastivada, there's 11 confessable offenses. In the Dharmaguptaka, there's 8. And so these are things where you ask for food, which you shouldn't ask for. Yeah, either because somebody hasn't offered it or whatever. So the 8, or however, this one has 11, have to do with asking for honey, asking for fish, asking for meat, different kinds of things like that, which you should not ask for, because it's up to people to offer those things. Okay, then there's 112 misdeeds, or this is sometimes instead of calling them misdeeds, they're called training rules. And these have a lot to do with etiquette. There's 100 in the Dharmaguptaka. So this is about where it concerns several precepts about wearing your robes correctly, not having them inside out, not walking into a late person's house, swinging your arms, just all sorts of things that have to do with etiquette, minding your own bowl instead of looking in the bowl of others, how you treat holy objects, not taking stupas into the bathroom, not squatting, not standing with your hands on your hips, these kinds of things, okay? So those are the Bikshuni precepts. Yeah. So you see that, they're very often quite similar, but counted differently. But when you go into some of the details, about what it takes. I know at least for the Parajika, there's some details that are different in the two, but the basic meaning of the precept and what affliction it's getting at is the same. I should say with all these precepts, both the bhikshus and the bhikshunis, they were made in ancient India for the people of that culture and that historical time. So often it's kind of, it can be very inconvenient to try and keep them in our day and age. So, for example, you know, only eating food that has been offered to you, as the Theravadas do it, it has to be put into your hands. Or if you're with a group of the Sangha, one person is designated as the person to receive it, and the food is put into their hands. Okay, if it's not put into your hands, even if somebody just leaves it on the counter and says, "This is for you," you cannot eat it. Okay, so this, as I see it, and also monastics are not allowed to cook, because if you cut vegetables, you may cut a worm or, kill some kind of insect or something like that. So our Theravada friends nowadays, even in the West, they keep this very strictly. And it's interesting because their whole day revolves around the meal, meaning lunch. Yeah, because it's very strict. You have to finish before midday, and it has to be offered to you into your hands. So everything is arranged, how you structure your day, where you're at, when you drive one place or another is structured around where you're going to be at the time of the meal. Yeah. And they seem to have enough people who will do that, although I've heard of some instances where it's has been quite inconvenient for the lay people. The way I see it, especially in our situation, being out in the boonies, is people in the city, they cannot. All of our people work. We have very few people who are not working. They all work. We can't ask them to drive an hour, hour and a quarter, hour and a half to come up here, offer the food, or bring the food and cook it, and then drive back and continue their workday. I mean, their employers just won't have that. They can't do that. Okay. Somehow our Theravada friends have people that will do that. Similarly, my Theravada friends, when they travel, they always have an assistant who handles the money, who makes all the arrangements for everything. Yeah. And again, we don't really have people who are not working who can afford to pay their own ticket and often pay the monastics' ticket because the monastics don't have their own money. So I see that now as if the Buddha were alive today, I don't think he would make those rules in the same way, because it would be very inconvenient for the lay people. And at the time of the Buddha, even when the lay people complained about how the Sangha was acting, the Buddha would make a precept so that the Sangha wasn't doing that. Okay. So in one way, we have precepts that we can't keep because the culture is different. Yeah. In another way, there are areas of our life now which there are no precepts in the Vinaya regarding, but I think there should be precepts. And I think if the Buddha were alive today, he would make precepts. For example, being online. Okay, I don't think the Buddha would say, yes, you can go online and look up anything you want to at any time of day, or night you want to. You can play video games, you can watch porn, the internet, there's no rules about the internet. Well, right now there's no rules about the internet. They didn't have it at the Buddhist time. But I think, if we understand the Buddha's purpose in creating, the precepts, they all have to do with restricting some kind of affliction, or with etiquette and um, being sensitive to the needs of the lay people who are helping. Yeah. So in the Abbey, we have guidelines regarding internet use. I don't know how many people keep them. Okay. For example, not to be online after 10 p.m. or before 7 a.m. To be, whenever you're online, have another person in the room, or have your screen visible so that if somebody walks by, they can see, what you're looking. To only look up things that have to do with either the Dharma or with your work. In other words, not to surf the internet for looking up this interesting thing or that interesting thing, or because you want to learn Swahili, so you're finding an online course for Swahili, or you decide you want to learn volleyball, and so finding out all the rules about volleyball. People get lost online. Yeah, we all know that, or you read one thing, or you remember a song that you knew way back in high school and you want to hear that song again, or you're trying to do a skit with a song and you listen to who knows how many songs for how long to find the perfect one and the perfect rendition so that you can use it. So I think the Buddha would definitely have some precepts about this kind of thing. Yeah. Just to give you some stories, uh, one of our monastic gatherings, was, what was this one? I forget where it was, but anyway, they picked us up at the airport and drove us, to the temple where the gathering was. And nuns, fine, no problem. The monks, we had one monk. It wasn't Venerable Losang at that time. It was Jampel. And so he rode with the monks, with the Theravada monks. And he told us that the whole ride, they were talking about their digital equipment. And hey, did you look at this? And Apple has that, and this is this, and this is that. And they're just talking about all their digital stuff. And, and here people aren't allowed to have their own smartphones and their own this and that and the other thing. But they keep, the Theravadas keep the Vinaya very strictly, but there's no precepts regarding smartphones. So, you can get as many smartphones and this and that as you want, okay? So, so like that. And about so this is not criticizing the Theravada, but it's just, I'm trying to explain why we have precepts here, okay? Because these things didn't exist at the Buddha's time, and yet they need regulation, yeah? As far as the food, one of the nuns told me a story that some people, these people happened to work, I think, maybe, but anyway, they brought food to the monastery. They left it on the counter. They said, "This is for," I think the nuns may have been, in session or something, but they left a note. "This is for you." They went back. So it's approaching lunchtime. And one of the nuns calls these benefactors and says, "You have to offer the food to us." And the benefactor says, "I'm at work, I can't come and offer it into your hands, but it is offered. We brought it up and we left it on the counter and it's clearly for you." And that nun said, we're not going to eat it. And her reason, we're not going to eat it unless it's offered into our hands. And her reason was that the monks would not eat it if it wasn't offered into their hands. And she thought the nuns should be treated the same way as the monks, instead of more informally or casually. Okay, so I think they didn't have lunch that day. Yeah. So this is the kind of thing where I think the sensitivity and consideration for the lay people is more important, than keeping something quite strictly. What else? Oh, then there's precepts that most of the precepts you can see the affliction that is being discussed, but sometimes it's not so evident. And so this is why, one of the reasons why it's important to know the stories behind the precepts, why each precept was set up. Because like I said, the Buddha didn't set up the precepts and then ordain people. He ordained people, and then as they made mistakes, the precepts were set up. So there's one precept for the nuns that we cannot eat garlic. Okay, so the story behind it, you'll see, has nothing whatsoever to do with garlic. Okay, so the story behind it is there was a farmer, and he saw one nun, and he said, I have a field full of garlic. You're welcome to come and choose some, and if you want to bring some friends with, that's fine. So she went back, she got her friends, she came back. The farmer was away, but he said they could do it. They took all the garlic in the whole field. When the farmer came back, he said, what happened? And they said, well, you said we could take it. I could bring my friends, so we did that. And the farmer said, you foolish people. Yeah. So this is a good example of the benefactor offers something, and then you just, without thinking and consideration for them, say, well, they offered it, I can take all of it. Yeah. So it's kind of like the example I gave before. Oh, they offered new robes. Oh, now I can get the most expensive robes. Okay. So, it's important to really learn the stories behind them, and so we understand it. There's another precept about not to, only to bathe every 2 weeks. That's going to be a little bit of a disaster if we kept that one. Okay. So we bathe when we need to bathe. We wear deodorant. We wash our clothes. Yeah. We don't want to have smelly rooms and smelly people. Okay. So, it doesn't mean you need to bathe every day. Yeah. Because, we don't live on a city water system. There's a limited amount of water in the ground here. So we take short showers, we bathe when we need to, we use deodorant, but we bathe, more than once every 2 weeks. Yeah. It would be pretty offensive if we didn't. Yeah. Okay, so there's certain things that have to be adapted to our present situation. Mm. Okay, there's another precept, not to ride in a vehicle. If we kept that precept, none of us would be here. Okay, the reason for that precept back in ancient India was they're twofold. One was it was only rich and important people who rode in vehicles. Second was the vehicles were either pulled by a human being or by an animal. And to exploit the energy of another living being to carry you from one place to another was just not acceptable. Okay? So now I think what we should do is our best not to ride in expensive cars, or things like that. So I don't know, I find this easy because I cannot tell one brand of car from the next. I can tell a car from a truck. I cannot tell a Chevy from a Volvo, from a Lexus, from any of these things, okay? It's just, if we were riding in a white car, I look for the right car and I hope it's the right white car, okay? But lots of people, they're very concerned with all the different cars. They want to be seen riding in a nice, expensive car with a benefactor that is, very wealthy, and to be seen like that. That is pride and attachment, isn't it? So we should not be looking out for the most expensive, nice car to ride in when somebody offers us a ride. Okay, so we're all going to use Heraldina to go to the doctors and the dentist. Yeah, we'll ride in the back of Heraldina. Yeah, put some branches on top of us. They won't know the difference. Okay, then for the monks, the Bhikshu vow. So there is 253 for Mula Sravastivada, and 250 for the Dharmaguptaka. I should also add, with both the Bhikshu and the Bhikshuni precepts, what they counted here, in neither one did they add the 10 precepts for ending disputes. Not 10, 7 precepts for ending disputes. But those actually go in both the Bhikshuni and the Bhikshu for the Dharmaguptaka. Yeah. Okay, so for the monks, it's 4 defeats in both traditions. Then the Dharmaguptaka has 2 undetermined precepts. I didn't see them in the listing of the Mula Sravastivada precepts, but maybe I just didn't notice them. But these are 2 precepts whereby what type of offense the monk commits depends upon the testimony of a woman. Yeah, so they both regard a monk acting improperly around a woman, but she's the one who says what he did, and then the monks know the severity, if it's a parajika, if it's a remainder, a sanghavasesa. Okay, then there, for both traditions have 13 remainders. Both of them have 30 forfeiture lapses. Both of them have 90 simple lapses. Both have 4 offenses to be confessed. And regarding the rules of etiquette, the training rules, Mula Sravastivada has 112, and Dharmaguptaka has 100. Okay, so that's the difference in the enumerations. These categories are the precepts put in each categories have to do with the severity of, somewhat, not strictly, but somewhat due to the severity of the action that is being spoken of, or it has to do with the type of object or person that is concerned in it. So that's how they're broken up into different groups. The actual offenses you commit have to do with not only the action, but how the action was done, and whether all the branches of the action were done, or only 1 or 2 or 3. And so the level of severity of the offenses is determined by that. Yeah. So you see that in understanding these things, you have to look at each situation individually, and who was the person, what was the conditions, what were they thinking, who were they dealing with, what did they do, how did they do it, okay? And so in that way, the type of offense is decided. Okay, then the next section is called the bases in which the vow is produced. In other words, who can take them. So these 8 types of pratimoksha, so we counted the 8, remember the 3 are for lay people and the 5 for monastics. So these 8 types of pratimoksha are produced in the basis of men and women of the 3 continents, except for Kuru. So you remember when we're making the mandala, yeah, there's 4 continents. So the continent of Kuru, if I remember correctly, people who are born there do not have the idea of personal possessions. So you cannot commit any actions of stealing. Yeah. So I think that's why it's only 3 continents where you can take the pratimoksha. But somebody might want to check up if that's accurate. That's just my memory. Okay. So the vows are produced on the basis of men and women of 3 continents except Kuru, but not such as eunuchs, hermaphrodites, and neuters. Okay, now it doesn't state exactly why for those people, but you can guess. One is that there could be confusion in their mind. 2 is that the Buddha set up the Bhikshu Sangha and the Bhikshuni Sangha. And for people who have an indeterminate sex or gender, it's difficult to know which Sangha community they would go into. Okay, so nowadays the whole social situation for transgenders has changed and it's much more acceptable. Yeah, but what do? We have a Bhikshu Sangha and a Bhikshuni Sangha. And when you are asked questions prior to the ordination, yeah, there's many questions and you have to have the right answer for all of them, otherwise you can't be ordained. So some of those questions have to do with the 5 heinous actions. If you've done any of those, you cannot ordain. You must know your name, your preceptor's name. You must have your robes and a bowl. Okay. And then they also asked you, are you a man? Are you a woman? What else did they ask? Several things, are you a eunuch? Are you not? Yeah, so different things regarding sexual identity and also the biological sex. Yeah, so yeah, so there's those kind of precepts. When I went through the Shramanera ordination last year, I mentioned the precepts, yeah. So, so people have to be able to, I mentioned the questions. So when people are asked those questions in the ordination, you have to answer truthfully, and the answers have to correspond with what is set up to be qualified to ordain. If you have very serious diseases, you cannot ordain. If you're crippled, you cannot ordain. If you have mental illness, you cannot ordain, severe mental illness. So these kinds of things. And I think it's, why did the Buddha do that? I think for the peace of the Sangha, because if everybody and their uncle or aunt or whoever it is were ordained, well, let me put it this way. I know from experience, all you need in a community is one person who is off, and it affects the entire community. Yeah. And it just creates, a lot of turbulence in people's mind and so on. And if somebody cannot keep up with what the Sangha is doing, like I told you the example of the people who ordained so that they could get free medical care, that kind of thing. So people who are deceptive, people who are not ordaining with a sincere motivation, or they have some physical or mental disability. Yeah. So that's the way the Buddha set it up. Now, people have very different values regarding some of those. Like one is you cannot ordain if you're blind or if you're deaf. In those days, they didn't have hearing aids and they didn't have Braille, okay? Nowadays, we have those things, so you would have to see somebody's ability to really study the Dharma and to learn and to function in the community, if they had those kinds of disabilities. But with other things, if they're very ill when they ordain, it's not going to work. The Sangha is not a hospice. It's not a hospital. If you ordain and then you fall ill, the Sangha takes care of you. But you have to be healthy when you ordain. Okay, so those are the bases. It doesn't go through all the questions. It just talks about very generally. Okay, now the cause of loss is the next section. So this has to do with how you lose or no longer have the ordination. So there are common causes and special causes. So the common causes, one is giving back the training. In other words, you give back your precepts. So if somebody finds that they just don't want to be ordained or they have some big obstacle or something's going on, they can give back the precepts. It's not like the Vatican where you have to write and ask the Pope or somebody there and they have to give permission. But if they don't give permission, you're not allowed to leave. Here, it's completely your own choice. And to do that, what you do, and you should always pray never to be in this situation and never to do this, but you say to somebody who understands what you're saying that you are giving back the ordination. Okay? So if you have different levels of ordination, you can say, I'm giving back my full ordination, but I'm keeping the novice ordination. Or I'm giving back the novice ordination, but I'm keeping the 5 lay precepts. So you can also do like that. Okay, so giving back the training, death. Yeah, when you die, you lose your pratimoksha precepts. You no longer have them. Because in the ceremony, you say, until the end of my life, for all these precepts, until the end of my life, I will avoid doing X, Y, Z. Okay, other common causes. Two sexes appear. In other words, you ordain and you're one sex, and then another organ appears. I guess this happened at that time. Also, another way of doing it is if you change sex three times. If you change it once or twice, you still have the precepts, but the precepts of the sex that you change into. Okay, so they didn't have transgender surgery at that time. So it seems like people had some kind of magical change or something. Or it could be because some people are born intersex and they don't really know which sex they are until they're older, and then it becomes apparent. So maybe it has to do with that. But let's say you're male and then you become a female. So that's one change. You go back to being a male. If you become a female, you ordain, you're a bhikshu. You change into a woman, then you're a bhikshuni. You go back to being male, then you have the bhikshu precepts. The third time, then you're done. Okay. Yeah. Your ordination is gone. Okay, and then cutting one's root of virtue is also a common cause for not having the ordination. And I've never been able to get a real clean, clear definition of what cutting the root of virtue means. Because in different contexts, it seems to mean different things. Yeah. Clearly, it has to do in some way with doing some kind of very negative action or having a very negative mental state. But exactly what the degree of that is, I've never been able to get really clear. Okay. So those are the common causes for losing. Then the special causes, okay, are most of these is you've taken the precepts, so at least for some of them, you've taken the precepts, and then let's say you've taken the bhikshu or bhikshuni precepts, and then you realize that you weren't yet 20 years old, that you were too young, so you couldn't take them. So that's the case for the men. For the women, if you were married, you can ordain when you're 12 and older. I don't understand, but I suspect it has to do because people were married off very, very young in those days. I mean, now it's prohibited, you can't do it, and it would be called child abuse. But in those days, very often when you were a baby, there was a pact made with another family, and the kids were married when they were little, or their marriage was planned, and then they took it. But anyway, you have to have a certain age in order to ordain. So either if somebody lies about their age, or they didn't know their actual age because they didn't have birth certificates in ancient India, then even though you went through the ceremony, you do not have the precepts if you were too young. Then the next way is agreeing to serve. So it doesn't specify here what that is. I suspect it is something like agreeing to serve in the government or as a soldier, because if you have an obligation, some kind of social obligation to somebody else, you're not allowed to ordain. So if you're a servant, if you are a government employee or official, if you were a prisoner, these kinds of things where there's some kind of social contract like that, then you can't ordain. So again, that that can cancel it. The next one is the days lapsing, this applies to the 1 day precepts. So at the end of that 1 day, then the precepts are gone. Okay, so these are special to respectively the bhikshus. Yeah. The training nuns. So the bhikshus would be, you're not 20. Training nuns agreeing to serve. How would that apply to only training nuns? I'm not sure, because it also makes sense, because I know that there's a question in both the bhikshu and bhikshuni precepts about if you're an official or a soldier or something like that. So, and then fasters, so the 1 day precepts, and that's the day lapsing. Some people assert that the precepts are lost if one commits a root offense or if the holy dharma vanishes. Yeah, but Vaibhasikas of Kashmir assert one with vows with a root fence is like a rich person with a debt. Okay, so what this means is, there's two different views about what happens if you commit a root offense, okay? So some people say if you commit a root offense, your ordination is finished and you leave the monastery, you take off your robes. Other people, the Kashmiri Vaibhasikas, assert that if you commit a root offense, it's like a rich man with a debt. In other words, you have your ordination, but you have a root offense. You also have to disrobe, but at that time, either you give back the remainder of your ordination, you have to give back your ordination, or the Sangha does a Sangha karma and expels you from the Sangha. Okay, because this group says that even though you broke a root precept, you still have the ordination, only it's damaged. It's like a rich person with a debt. Okay, then the next section is the benefits. So from keeping these vows, one will gain the temporal fruit, divine or human birth. So you'll be born in an upper rebirth as a human being or in the God realm. And you also, it's called temporal because it happens within samsara. Or the ultimate fruit, so this is the transcendental result, are the three awakenings. So the awakening of a Shravaka, the awakening of a solitary realizer, the awakening of a Buddha. Okay. Since this is taught, the energetic always keep the pratimoksha, devotedly striving. So if you see these benefits for this life and for future lives, you keep your pratimoksha precepts very well and continue. When it says striving, it doesn't mean, striving is a bit of a harsh word. You keep having joyous effort in your practice. And then the dedication is, by this virtue, may embodied beings throughout their rebirth live in pure conduct. And then this verse, which is actually it's from a text by Maitreya. I can't remember the name of the text, but it's the same verse that we say at the end of the 8 Mahayana precepts. Let us have pure ethical conduct. This is the translation here. Let us have pure ethical conduct with faultless ethical conduct, and by unconceited ethical conduct, complete the perfection of ethical conduct. Okay, so to have pure ethical conduct, we take the precepts, we keep them well. Yeah. They're faultless. Again, we keep them well, and if we don't, we confess, and then we repair them. And remember, for the naturally negative actions, we have to do the 4 opponent powers, and for the ones that, the precepts that, the actions that are prescribed by the proscribed, but in other words, to be abandoned by the Buddha, then we have to do the posada ceremony. Some precepts, for example, not to kill, that is both naturally negative, and there's the precept that's prescribed by the Buddha. So that, to purify, you have to do both things. Okay. And then unconceited ethical conduct. This is important, okay? Because some people can be so meticulous in their ethical conduct that they think that they're somebody special. you know, my ethical conduct is purer than yours. You are lapsed in your precepts, but I am pure. I don't have the slightest infraction, you know? And somebody gets conceited and arrogant, and that is really not the Buddha's intention for giving the pratimoksha precepts. Okay, so it's really important when we're ordained to always be humble, yeah, and not go around and gloat or put ourselves up or think we're somebody special. Yeah, that's really important. You can see the people who act like that, the lay people do not respect them. Yeah? And yeah, because who likes a conceited person? Yeah, not many people. So to really avoid getting conceited about our ethical conduct. Okay, so that's the end. I will read the beginning again, because this is the tradition when you finish a text to start over again, and then you read a little bit, and then you don't continue. So that means you have to meet again and go through the text again. So the essence of the Vinaya Ocean by J. Tsongkhapa. Oh, may it be well. Homage to the Omniscient One. The means dependent on which one goes with ease to Liberation City, the Sugata's doctrine's supreme essence, which is known as pratimoksha, I shall explain in 6 parts: nature, divisions, the recognition of each, bases in which it is produced, cause of loss, and benefits. And then the rest follows that we went through. So we finished the text. Hooray! Now you can ask questions.
It'd be a very obvious answer to it, but if the Mulavasthavada Vinaya tradition says that there is no way to have bhikshunis,
The initial Mulashavastivada had bhikshunis.
and that was in
India.
India.
They had India.
Okay.
What's happening is because that lineage didn't go to Tibet, and Tibet is the only country now that's holding the Mulashavastivada lineage, then you can't have a dual ordination. You have to wait for Maitreya to come. He's the next Buddha. It's a long wait.
Venerable, I know you didn't have time, but where can we really read the precepts of the bhikshus and the bhikshunis?
You have to find a translation of them. And it's interesting, technically speaking, if you do not hold those precepts, you are not allowed to know what they are. Okay, why? 2 reasons. I've heard for 2 reasons. One is because then, as a layperson, if you knew what the bhikshu and bhikshuni precepts were, you would also know when people were breaking them, and you would lose respect for the sangha. So better that you don't know. Another reason is that if you were thinking of taking them and you knew what the precepts were, you might get discouraged and say, oh, there's just too many of them and it's too hard, and so not ordain. So those were the 2 reasons that they usually talk about. Nowadays, okay, many of the masters let people read the bhikshu and bhikshuni precepts. And I personally think that it's helpful if somebody does, if they're thinking of taking those precepts. Okay, so where would you find one? In the posada ceremonies, because when the sangha does the posada, you read all your precepts. Yeah. But the thing is, when you just read the precepts, there's no explanation. So it's very easy to misunderstand and misinterpret. So that could also be a reason why people are not supposed to know what they are until they have them. Although, nowadays I think it's quite helpful if people are going to take them if they know because then they can really think about the precepts. Yeah, so usually they would say, you're not going to be ordaining, so there's no need for you to read them. Yeah. If we felt that there was a good reason for you to read them, like you want to, even though you can't ordain, but you want to kind of live by them as best as you can anyway, yeah, then I would say it's okay if you read them, but not to go and give it around to everybody, okay? So in special cases, yeah, this is just my own personal discretion, yeah. Similarly with, sometimes we have people come here from other traditions and or they're shramaneras, like you're a shramaneri, then I think it's okay when the shikshamanas read all their precepts. It's okay. I think it's okay if you attend, yeah, because you would like to be able to keep those, and it's helpful for you to know what they are.
Very well, two questions. First question is, I heard from our past few years that you mentioned that some of the Western monastics take the ordination. After that study already, at the end, realize that they are not even a monk because of the precepts. I don't quite get it because I thought
Okay.
that, yeah.
Okay, so this is what the Tibetans say, and they say it as a joke, but actually it's something serious. And the thing is that for the Tibetans, when they enroll in the monastery, yeah, then they're little and they start with the, the 8 precepts, and then they go up. So they don't teach you the vinaya when you first ordain, because you're memorizing all these texts, and you're studying collective topics, and you're studying mind and awareness, and you're studying reasoning. And then you go on through the whole education program. And the way they have it arranged, you study vinaya as the last topic. So then they say, when you have the precepts, when you're young and you first take them, you don't know what they are. But by the time you are older, after 20 years of study, and you reach the Vinaya class, you've broken them. Ha 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 ha! Isn't that funny? So they say it as a joke, kind of thing. But there's some seriousness in it, yeah. And that's why at the Abbey, when people ordain, they study the precepts. Even before they ordain, they study the precepts. Okay, so you've watched the videos about the Shramanera precepts, yeah, and the nuns have watched the ones about the Shikshamana. So because I think it's very helpful if people know before, yeah. But the Tibetans, this is just their way of doing things.
Second question is very important. How do you get through it especially when there is not enough monk to do posada? How do you actually go through it in the initial days when we have less nuns?
Okay. When you don't, it takes 4 to fully ordained people to do the actual posada. If you're alone, then you imagine the Buddha, you confess, yeah, you can do the 35 precepts, and then you read your precepts. If there's 2 of you, then you confess to each other, you read the precepts. So you read the precepts, but you do not do the whole posada ceremony unless you have 4 fully ordained. Okay? Yeah, but that still means you can still confess, you can still purify, and you should. You shouldn't just say, "Oh well, this is I'm on leave right now, and it's posada time, so just forget it. I'll go out and have a sandwich, and I don't need to confess because I only do that when I'm with the sangha." No, you go through your precepts and confess and restore.
I'm curious about the precept about garlic because it seems like there's a disconnect between the action of not eating garlic today and the intent of not being greedy.
Yes.
And just
Definitely.
thoughts about that.
Yeah, my thought is, yeah, they don't match. They don't match. And there's not very many precepts are like that, but there are a couple of them like that, you know. So my feeling is that, well, first of all, in general, in Indian culture, they say onions and garlic create desire energy, so best not to eat it. In the West, they say garlic is like medicine. Two totally different views. We're following the Indian one here. What else? Yeah, what's the, I think with all the precepts, we should look at what is the real intention. Yeah. And so here it's really about not being greedy, isn't it? Yeah, which is something very important. Yeah, the eating of the garlic is not nearly as important as the being greedy. But I don't know, that's the way the precept turned out. I don't know why.
I'm wondering about the one about not going on the road alone.
Uh-huh.
So how, what does it mean? Like, can you go for a walk alone? Or
Okay. So in ancient India, women were never out alone in public. If you were out alone in public, everybody thought you were a prostitute. So whenever they saw a woman just walking alone in town, she would get propositions, she would get called names, she would get, people would jeer at her. Okay, so to protect the nuns from that, then it says don't go out alone. Yeah. What we do here, because now society is completely different. You see women out alone and it's no problem, usually. Yeah. But what we do is we say, and this goes for men equally, we're making it gender equal. Here at the Abbey, nobody goes out alone after dark. So if you have to go to town to give a Dharma talk or something and you're not coming back until it's dark, then you have a companion in the car. And the reason for this is, I mean, you've driven on these roads and they're pretty dark and forlorn. And if you ran out of gas or you had a flat tire or something happened and it was 11 o'clock at night in the dark, yeah, and you forgot the cell phone or you remembered the cell phone, but it was out of juice, and this happens, then you've really had it. So we say if somebody's going to be out after dark, then they have somebody of the same sex with them. Yeah, or there's 3 people in the car. It can be mixed sexes, but 3 people in the car. Okay, and it's for safety. Yeah. Oh, and also just to say, to tell a story, one of my friends, a Bikshuni, was invited to give a teaching somewhere. She gave the teaching in the evening. It ended, I don't know, 9 or 10 o'clock. She was driving back to where she lived, which was probably about an hour away, and she stopped to get gas. And she was the only woman at the gas station. And the men who were there also getting gas started giving her a really hard time because she was alone and it was dark. So in those kind of situations, then it's just better, to make some kind of arrangement.
Earlier, you mentioned some internet guidelines at the Abbey, and you mentioned not looking up things that aren't related to Dharma or your work or your offering service. But what about the news? I've had quite a few conversations where people weren't sure how much time they had each day to look at news, and did it depend on their status, their ordination level?
I think people can look at the news, but better to do it briefly. Okay, and if there's something really big, I'll tell you, because I read the news from beginning to end whenever I'm not here. I am glued to the, no. Okay, so it's good to have some news, but don't spend a lot of time reading the news. Because, a lot of it's very interesting when you look, a lot of the articles are people's opinions. The opinion section is really big, and the actual reporting number of articles is much smaller. So you read people's opinions, then the next day they change their opinion. You read things, and then the next day it's different. So not too much time, because reading the news is not going to get you to awakening. It's helpful, like I said, if you're talking to lay people and you have to know what's going on, or you're giving a teaching and you use it as an example.
And this applies to Anagarikas as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody who's living here. So often people say, well, why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do the other thing? The monastery guidelines, which are unique to the Abbey, are made for certain reasons. They aren't just made up because people want to make other people inconvenienced, or they want to have power over other people. There's a specific reason why things are said. Yeah. And so that's part of the training, is to, in the beginning, you may not understand what the reason is. Yeah. But you may come to understand it, or you can ask what the reason is. Yeah. When you ask what the reason is and somebody tells you, you don't go, well, I don't think that's a very good reason, so I'm not going to follow it. I'm an individual here at the Abbey, so just shut up and don't tell me what to do. If somebody really feels that way, there's the whole rest of the world where you can go and do whatever you want to do. Yeah. And so we don't expect everybody who comes here to say, oh, yes, the Abbey is wonderful, I want to live here. Some people come and it's like, I can't tell you the number of people, I want to ordain, they move here. And then they realize that they really miss their partner. Well, great, go back home to your partner, that's good. Don't ask us to bring your partner here. Okay, if you want to be with your partner, there's the whole rest of the world to be with them. Okay, so we're setting up a particular environment here for a particular reason. Yeah, and it's set up due to the wisdom of the Buddha and due to the wisdom of some of the seniors who have had some experience, who know what the traps are and are trying to guide people who are sincere. Yeah. But if you don't like the whole show, that's great. You can go somewhere else. Nobody's going to talk you into being here or force you to be here or anything like that.
So when you're ordaining and they say you're going forth and leaving the householder life, so are there precepts that are specific to your relationship with your family? Like, are there any precepts guiding that?
There's not specific things. I mean, there is, if you lose your robe, a family member, can offer you one very quickly. Another person, it takes more time or a different way they offer. There's nothing said about going to stay with your family or anything in the precepts themselves. I think at the time of the Buddha, people didn't stay with their family when they were ordained because they were all wanderers. They collected alms, and then they, went. The men usually slept under a tree. The women had some kind of enclosed area where they slept. So people didn't stay in their family's house. Yeah, Venerable Wu Yin, I was present when she ordained some novices, and the parents were there, and she told the parents, your daughters are not going to be staying in your own home again. They can come visit you, but they're not going to stay in the home. Okay? We don't set that up quite like that, here, because it's a different culture, and parents might get really upset if and also because if you went to see your parents, you would have to pay for a hotel, and who has the money to pay for a hotel? Okay, in the time of the Buddha, they just slept, out somewhere else. It wasn't a problem. Okay.